Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of May. May is also the month in which the Asian Readathon occurs, and I attempted to be a part of that. Didn't go quite as I had originally planned. I didn't really stick to my TBR for the month, but I think it went okay, and I'm going to tell you about it. So the first thing I read in May was Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Ngan. This is the second book in a trilogy, starting with Girls of Paper and Fire. It follows Lei, who's a teenage girl living in a sort of countryside town, and basically in this world there are three castes. The three castes are the Moon caste, which is the highest, the Steel caste, which is like the middle, and the Paper caste, which is the lowest. And basically the height of your caste is determined by how demon you are. So the more demon you are, the higher your caste. So full demons are the Moon caste, half demons are Steel caste, and Paper caste are humans. So our main girl, Lei, is a human, and she lives in a small town and works in her father's herb shop sometimes, and her mother has been killed by the ruling demon people in a raid. And our book starts when she gets taken from her little town to become a paper girl, which is basically a concubine for the king. These paper girls are they technically have a high status. They're highly valued in the community, but also a lot of them are not willingly in this position. So it gets into some really heavy topics. Those topics continue to be explored throughout the second and third books. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I also read the third book this month, but I'll get to that in a minute. So for now, just Girls of Storm and Shadow continues to sort of deal with the aftermath of everything that happens in the first book. I don't want to get into it too detailedly because I don't want to do spoilers for the first book, but it deals with a lot of the sort of ramifications of everything that happens. We get into more like political intrigue type stuff, more revolution type of energy from this. It's a dystopian series, and I definitely feel like we get that dystopian vibe a lot more heavily in this book than we did in the first book. And I went into this not really sure of how much I was going to enjoy it because I had heard, not super positive reviews about it. But I did enjoy it. There were definitely some things that I saw coming, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's difficult to express my feelings about this book because I do kind of feel like this could have been a duology, but there was also a lot of great discussion of consequences and feelings and emotions following everything that happened in the first book that I thought was really great. So I did enjoy all of that. There were just some other aspects that I didn't really enjoy as much, like the main romance was a little bit hard to root for at times, and some side characters were kind of insta-lovey to me, but there were also some side characters that I absolutely loved. This definitely felt very much like a middle book, like this is just getting us from book 1 to book 3, and this is the bridge. But I enjoyed it still overall. I enjoyed it enough to continue with the third one, as you know. I think it's really good for scratching that YA dystopian itch if you ever get that feeling. I think it's a great series for that. There were a couple of moments that I felt were a little bit heavy-handed with the writing, but for the most part, I thought it was enjoyable, a good adventure story, and a good bridge from book 1 to book 3. Meanwhile, I was also reading Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura and translated by Philip Gabriel. I started this at the beginning of the month, and I knew right away that it was going to take me the whole month to get through the entire thing because it's not hard to read in a literary sense, but it was difficult for me because a lot of the emotions are really intense. And well, let me tell you what it's about. So our protagonist, Kokoro, has dropped out of school. She's in junior high, and she has dropped out of school due to severe bullying and anxiety surrounding that bullying. She is now in a really uncomfortable position with a lot of depression, and we really get into her depression and anxiety surrounding school. A lot of the lines were just so, like, perfectly capture the feeling of depression that I had to read it in little chunks because otherwise the emotions would be too intense for me to continue. I thought this was really good. It definitely feels very dreamlike, very floaty in a lot of ways. It had a lot of really great characters. Specifically, the other characters come about when Kokoro, near the beginning of the book, magically goes into a mirror. Her mirror in her bedroom starts shining and she touches the surface and she gets transported to a castle with a bunch of other kids in it. The book basically follows her adventures in that castle. So I thought this was really good. And then I got to the ending and I thought it was great. The ending really hit me. I cried a significant amount during the ending, so be prepared for that. I am an easy crier, I will say. So if you're not one, it might not hit you like it hit me, but I thought this was a great story. I definitely enjoyed taking my time with it. Like I said, it did take me the whole month. I think I finished on the last day of May or maybe even the first day of June. But I absolutely loved seeing Kokoro's journey. A lot of the reveals were fantastic because there's sort of a central mystery happening. And this was just wonderful. I went from liking it to getting to that ending and loving it. Definitely one of the highlights of the month. After finishing Girls of Storm and Shadow, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to read next. I had created this TBR for myself for the Asian readathon that would have like fulfilled the challenges, but I didn't end up doing that. I didn't really feel like reading those books that I had set out for myself. So instead, I kind of waffled around for a while and read some manga. And the first manga that I read was Yona of the Dawn. I read the first volume of that and really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun introduction to the story. I'm interested to see what happens with the characters. I don't love it so far, but this is only the very beginning of the story, so I'm excited to see where it goes and to see developments. I do have the second volume, so I'm planning to read that this month. I also read volume 4 of Bloom Into You by Nakatani Neo. To be perfectly honest, I do not really remember what happened in this volume, but I know that this series overall has been really enjoyable for me and that each volume has really great moments, has wonderful emotions. Like I said, I don't really remember reading this, but I have continued with the series since then and I am absolutely loving it. I'm pretty deep in the series now. It's only 8 volumes and I'm really looking forward to finishing it. So even though I don't really remember what happened in volume 4, I know that it was really enjoyable and I do recommend this series overall. And if you're not familiar with the series of Bloom Into You, it occurs to me at this moment that I also didn't describe what Yona of the Dawn is about, so I'll get back to that in a second. But Bloom Into You is a sapphic story largely about a pair of teenage girls who are in junior high school or high school. I think they're in early high school, and the main character, Yu, has what she sees as a problem where she hasn't fallen in love with anybody, and she meets somebody else like her, and the books follow their relationship as they figure out where they stand. There's also a play involved. There's cute dates. There's love triangle energy. There's a lot of really great stuff in this series, and I'm really enjoying it. As for Yona of the Dawn, because I'm good at this, Yona of the Dawn is, I don't want to give anything away, and there's some stuff that I think would be considered spoilers if I explain it. But basically, it's about a princess whose life gets turned upside down when people try to murder her. And she has to flee the castle with somebody else close to her to protect her. That's basically the entirety of volume 1. I haven't gotten any further than that yet, but that's what it's about so far. And I've heard this series really hyped up by a lot of other booktubers, so I'm hoping to really love it. Like I said, I was feeling kind of okay. I read it and I thought it was enjoyable, but I wasn't blown away or anything like that. So I'm excited to get deeper into it and see kind of what all of the hype is about. With that in mind, I also wasn't loving Bloom Into You until I got to the second volume, so I'm hoping that's what happens with Yona as well. So the next book I read was Girls of Fate and Fury, the final book in the Girls of Paper and Fire trilogy. And basically, I realized that I just didn't want to be reading anything else until I had finished this series. So went ahead and picked it up. This one I liked better than the second book. I definitely think that it had some satisfying moments. We had some satisfying character stuff. There was also some unsatisfying character stuff, in my opinion. A lot of really brutal moments occur in this series, and the third book was definitely no exception. A lot of the things that we've been building towards from the first book sort of come to a head in this, as you would expect in the end of a trilogy. I liked it. I thought it was fast-paced, fun. Like I said, it scratches that teen dystopian itch, which I think is often a good time. It's fun to have books like that. And this one also had a lot of emotional depth, and a lot of important topics were discussed in it, which I think is great. So there were a lot of things to love in this series. Overall, plot-wise, I would have liked it if the series were shorter. Emotional discussion-wise, I think it was the right length. The third book did feel a little bit long to me. Like, there were some moments that felt like, why are we doing this? This feels like a distraction from the main plot. But overall, I liked it. The ending was satisfying to me. This one got some tears from me as well. There are definitely a lot of heavy topics in these books, and at the beginning of each book, there is sort of a warning about some of the topics that will be covered. So I definitely recommend that every reader check out that warning before diving in, because a lot of the stuff is pretty heavy, especially for a young adult series. But I think it's great to have these topics discussed. I think there are a lot of teenagers who would find these books useful, and I think they're a good starting point for discussions, while also just being an interesting fantasy series. I'm really glad that I read these books, and I'm glad that I finally finished them after holding off for years after the first one. In general, I broadly recommend them, but also read those warnings. And that was everything that I read in the month of May. Like I said, I kind of derailed my TBR, and so I didn't really fulfill the challenges set by with Cindy, but it was still a good reading month, and I'm glad I was able to get these books in there. It was also the month of finals for school, so that was a little bit rough, and I didn't have as much energy to devote towards reading, but it is summer break now, and I'm so excited to dive into my TBR. I have already been doing a pretty good amount of reading, and I'm very excited to talk to you all about it at the end of this month. I hope you had a great reading month as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and have a great night, universe.